What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live in a living color from the Radio What studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter? It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, where do you go? DJLittleRock.com. Check availability and get a free price quote. And maybe you can have me at your next event. If you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. But for today, let's learn some things on What Makes You Smarter. Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 things you need to know today for Monday, May 18th, 2020. 10 things you need to know today. Number 1, governors continue push to reopen as COVID-19 deaths near 90,000. Governors are pressing forward with efforts to slowly reopen their economies on Monday as the number of U.S. coronavirus deaths nears 90,000. Texas reported its highest daily increase in coronavirus cases over the weekend, but Governor Greg Abbott, Republican, attributed the rise to increased testing. The state plans to announce the second phase of its reopening on Monday. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, Democrat, said Sunday that 2 more regions in the state were poised to join 5 that already have started the first phase of reopening. Quote, all of this is a work in progress, end quote, said Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Republican, on CNN's State of the Union. Quote, we thought it was a huge risk not to open, but we also know it's a huge risk in opening, end quote. This is according to CNN and the New York Times. Number 2, Pelosi, firing of State Department watchdog, possibly unlawful. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, California, said Sunday that President Trump's firing of the State Department's Inspector General, Steve Linick, quote, could be unlawful, end quote, if it was done in retaliation for an investigation he was conducting. Quote, the president has the right to fire any federal employee, but the fact is, if it looks like it's in retaliation for something the IG, the Inspector General, was investigating, that could be unlawful, end quote, Pelosi said on CNN State of the Union. Trump ousted Linick on Friday. Linick is the 4th internal watchdog Trump has fired since April. Congressional Democrats on Saturday launched investigations into the matter. One official said Linick had been looking into whether Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had a staffer do personal errands for him, including walking his dog and picking up his laundry. This is according to Reuters and the Washington Post. Number 3, Sanders says his supporters will vote for Biden at the end of the day. Senator Bernie Sanders, Independent Vermont, on Sunday said that former Vice President Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, ultimately would win over people who back Sanders' presidential campaign. Quote, I think at the end of the day, they will be voting for Joe Biden, end quote, Sanders said on ABC's This Week. Host George Stephanopoulos had asked Sanders to comment on a memo by his former campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, warning that Biden was, quote, falling short, end quote, with Sanders supporters. Sanders said the, quote, vast majority, end quote, of his backers views President Trump as the, quote, most dangerous president in modern history, end quote. Sanders said Biden is starting to make necessary appeals to young voters, working class people, and minorities, telling them, quote, listen, I understand your situation, end quote. This is according to The Hill. Number 4, Fed Chair says full economic recovery could take 18 months. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said Sunday that the full recovery from lockdowns intended to slow the spread of the coronavirus could take until late 2021. Quote, this economy will recover. It may take a while, end quote, Powell said on CBS's 60 Minutes. Powell described the crisis as the, quote, biggest shock that the economy has had in living memory, end quote. The coronavirus lockdowns have brought much of the economy to a halt, leaving tens of millions of Americans jobless. Powell has urged Congress and the White House to provide more support for individuals and businesses if the pandemic drags on. He said that the economy would recover steadily in the second half of 2020, quote, assuming that there's not a second wave of the coronavirus, end quote. This is according to the New York Times. Number 5, Israel's new government sworn in. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu swore in a new government on Sunday after a 3-day delay caused by infighting in his own Likud party. The Knesset, Israel's parliament, approved the unity government, ending more than 500 days of turmoil after Netanyahu and his election rival turned partner, centrist Benny Gantz, unveiled their appointments for the 36-member cabinet. Netanyahu and Gantz, a former military chief, announced last month that they would join forces after 3 inconclusive elections in a year and form a government together to lead the country through the coronavirus crisis, which has driven up unemployment to 25%. Netanyahu will serve as prime minister for 18 months, then Gantz will take over for 18 months. This is according to the Associated Press. Number 6, Trump criticizes Obama after commencement speeches. President Trump on Sunday responded to 2 virtual commencement speeches by former President Barack Obama, calling Obama, quote, an incompetent president, grossly incompetent, end quote. Obama delivered his addresses on Saturday to graduating seniors at historically black colleges and universities, and in a speech broadcast on major TV networks to graduating high school seniors nationwide. Obama did not mention Trump by name, but parts of both speeches were widely seen as rebukes of Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Quote, more than anything, this pandemic has finally torn back the curtain on the idea that so many of the folks in charge know what they're doing, end quote, Obama told the college graduates. This is according to the Washington Post and The Guardian. Number 7, U.S. military space plane returns to orbit. The U.S. military sent its mystery space plane, the solar-powered X-37B, into orbit on Sunday. The winged spacecraft, launched in a Saturn V rocket, is flown by remote control without a crew and has an extra compartment for experiments. But the duration and purpose of the mission was not disclosed. The launch marked the second for the newly formed Space Force, but the military's reusable space planes had logged a total of 2,865 days in orbit as of Sunday. After a decade of flights, the spacecraft are modeled after the retired Space Shuttle fleet, although the military craft are just 29 feet long, 1/4 of the size of the old shuttles. This is according to the Associated Press. Number 8, Canadian Snowbird's jet crashes, killing 1. A Canadian Forces Snowbirds plane crashed shortly after takeoff on Sunday, killing 1 member of the acrobatic jet team and seriously injuring another. The aircraft was following another jet when it veered up, circled the runway, and went into a nosedive, slamming into the front yard of a house and bursting into flames. A public affairs officer, Captain Jen Casey, was killed. The pilot of the CT-114 Tudor jet, Captain Richard McDougall, was left with injuries that were not considered life-threatening. The Snowbirds team was on a cross-country tour to, quote, lift up Canadians, end quote, during the coronavirus crisis. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said, quote, every day they represent the very best of Canada, end quote, he said. This is according to the CBC. Number 9, judge rejects Shkreli request for prison release. A federal judge has denied disgraced pharmaceutical executive Martin Shkreli's request for release from prison to spearhead research on coronavirus treatments, the Washington Post reported on Sunday. Shkreli, widely known as, quote, Pharma Bro, end quote, was convicted in 2017 of defrauding investors and is serving a 7-year sentence in low-security Pennsylvania prison. He earlier gained notoriety for hiking the price of an AIDS drug by 5,000%. He had argued that efforts to find treatments for COVID-19 were, quote, inadequate, end quote, and he was, quote, one of the few executives, end quote, with the experience to develop the needed drugs. Probation department officials overseeing his case dismissed his claims as the kind of, quote, delusional self-aggrandizing behavior, end quote, that landed him in prison. This is according to the Washington Post. Number 10, televised golf returns with charity match. Dustin Johnson and Rory McIlroy defeated Ricky Fowler and Matthew Wolff in a charity match on Sunday in the first live U.S. golf broadcast since the PGA Tour was suspended March 12th due to the coronavirus pandemic. The tailor-made driving relief skins game, played without fans or media at Seminole Golf Club in Juno Beach, Florida, raised at least $5.5 million for COVID-19 relief. The match remained undecided after 18 holes, and McIlroy, the world number one, won a 19th hole closest to the pin challenge to take the final skins and the win. McIlroy and Johnson played for the American Nurses Foundation, while Fowler and Wolff played for the CCD Foundation. The PGA Tour plans to return on June 11th with the Charles Schwab Challenge in Texas, but the tour won't allow fans for at least a month. This is according to Yahoo Sports and the PGA Tour. That's 10 things you need to know today for Monday, May 18th, 2020. Thank you for listening. This has been What Makes You Smarter. If you'd like to tell your story or hear the stories of others, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you so much, and I hope you're doing reasonably well. Let me know how you're doing. Drop me some comments. Leave me a review. Let me know what you're up to. Really, I really want to know. I'm really interested. This has been Keys Dan, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here. Peace. I'm out of here. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at SmarterWhat, and YouTube. Username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me/Keys Dan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening.